Chapter 38 Laughter and Tears Part 1 It was all over. Winnie had gone. "Pat, darling," she whispered, with her eyes softly full of farewell. "Everything was lovely. I've really enjoyed my own wedding. You and Judy were wonderful." Pat managed to smile as Judy had exhorted. But when Judy found her looking at the deserted festal board, she said, "Judy, isn't it nice to be able to stop smiling? I I hope there won't be another wedding at Silverbush for 100 years." "Why, I wish we could have a wedding every day," said Cuddles. "I suppose the next one here will be your own, and then it will be my turn. That is," she added reflectively, "if I can get anyone to have me. I don't want to be an old maid." "Sure, and don't be hurting my feelings," said Judy. "I'm an old maid." "I always forget that," said Cuddles contritely. "You aren't a bit like an old maid, Judy. You're just Judy." "Mr. Ronald Russell of St. John told me mother was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen," said Pat. "And you'll be loving Mr. Ronald Russell forever because of it. But I'm thinking he's right. Did you hear him saying to Winnie, 'Are you going to be making a Presbyterian of him?' Meaning Frank. And Winnie says she, 'Presbyterians don't be made, they're born,' says she. Oh, wasn't that the answer to me smart gentleman? St. John can't be getting far ahead of Silverbush, I'm thinking. He had his appetite with him, that one, but I do be liking a man who enjoys his victuals." "He's a member of Parliament," said Pat, "and they say he'll be Premier some day." "And him, old short and dirty Russell's son, a fat chanced," said Judy scornfully. "I hope the pictures will turn out well," said Cuddles. "I was in them all." Anyway, Winnie wasn't photographed with her arm round her groom like Jean Madison was. "Oh, decent, I called it. And now, Patsy darling, will we start cleaning up or leave it till the morning?" "Whatever you like, Judy." Oh, it's ye our mistress here now, with Winnie gone and your mother never to be troubled. It's for ye to give orders and for me to obey them." "Nonsense, Judy. Fancy me giving you orders." "I'd rather it that way, Patsy darling," said Judy firmly. Pat hesitated, then quietly accepted the sovereignty of Silverbush. "Very well, Judy. We'll leave things just as they are tonight. We're all tired. Do you remember the night after Aunt Hazel's wedding when we did the dining room? It's the daddlin' you was, working like a little slave to keep from crying. And you told me funny stories. Judy, let's have a bit of a fire. There's a chill in the air, and the first fire is such a delightful thing, and we'll sit by it and you'll tell stories. You must have been hearing all my stories a million times over, Patsy, though I do be thinking when I saw the Joe Kellis today, he did be marrying his wife because a little girl he was sweet on jilted him, and she married him because Sam Miller of the Bayshore jilted her. So what would you expect? That they wouldn't be very happy, Judy. Oh, and that's where you would be wrong, me jewel. The marriage was by way of being a big success. That do be life, you know." "Life is queer, Judy. Winnie and her Frank now. She doesn't seem to have a fear or doubt. I'd be frightened. I could never be sure I loved anyone enough to marry him. And then, today, away down in my heart I was just sick over Winnie going. And yet on the surface I was enjoying the excitement too. There do be always something to take the edge off things," said Judy shrewdly. "That do be why nothing is ever as hard as you think it's going to be." Hilary came in after having driven some of the guests to the station and joined them. Bold and Bad, who had been sulking all day because nobody had admired him, lay down on the rug, gathered his feet and nose and tail into a snug circle, and forgave the world. Old Aunt Louisa, who had seen so much come and go, looked down on them from the wall. The white kittens still gambolled in immortal youth. King William still rode proudly across the Boyne. It was rather nice to have a feeling of leisure and tranquillity again. And yet Pat was afraid that upstairs there was a dreadful stillness, and silence after all the fuss was over that would pounce on her when she went to bed. She kept Hilary as long as she could, and was so nice to him that when he said good night to her on the poplar patterned doorstep, he was bold enough to ask her to kiss him. "Of course I'll kiss you," said Pat graciously. "I've been kissing so many friends today, one more or less doesn't matter." "I don't want a friendly kiss," said Hilary, and went off on that note. Oh, and you might have given him a kiss," said Judy, who was always hearing what she had no business to. "He'll be going away far enough all too soon, poor boy." I was perfectly willing to kiss him," cried Pat chokingly. "And don't talk of his going away. I can't bear it tonight." Part 2. Pat was very lonely when she went up to bed. The house seemed so strangely empty now that Winnie's laugh had gone out of it. Here was the mirror that had reflected her face. That little vacant chair where she had always sat was very eloquent. Her little discarded slippers that could have danced by themselves the whole night through, so often had Winnie's feet danced in them, comforted each other under the bed. They looked as if her feet had just stepped out of them. Her fragrance still lingered in the room. It was all terrible. Pat leaned out of the window to drink in the cold, delicious air. The wind sounded eerie in the bushes. A dog was barking over at Swallow Field. Pat had rather thought that when she found herself alone she would cast herself on the bed in an abandonment of anguish. But there was still moonlight in the world, still owls in the silver bush. The old loyalties of home were still potent. It would be nice to have a room of one's very own. A house always looks very pathetic and unfriended on a day after a festivity. Pat found happiness and comfort in restoring it all from cellar to garret. The presents were packed and sent to the bay shore. It was fun to read the account of the wedding in the papers. The bride before her marriage was Winifred Alma, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Alec Gardner. That hurt Pat. Wasn't Winnie still their daughter? The bridesmaids wore dresses of pink georgette crepe with pink mohair hats and bouquets of sweet peas. Little Emily Madison made a charming flower girl in a smocked frock of pink voile. Fancy little Emily having her name and dress in the papers. Miss Patricia Gardner, sister of the bride, was charming in marigold voile. And, oh, Miss Judy Plum wore blue silk with corsage of roses. It must have been that rogue of a Jen Russell who had that put in. Judy was tremendously pleased. Her name, right there with all the quality, bracketed with the groom's aunt, the haughty Mrs. Ronald Russell, in her black satin with mauve orchids, though Judy was a bit dubious about corsage. It sounded, well, a little queer. Then there were visits to the bay shore, to help Winnie get settled in her big white house with its background of sapphire water, where there was a coloured, fir-scented garden, full of wind music and bee-song, that dipped in terraces to the harbour shore and was always filled with the sound of perilous seas forlorn. Pat would have been quite happy if she could have forgotten that Hilary was going away.